He stood up, straightened his tie, and said, "We're leaving. Forever." I'll never forget the way the room fell silent. My son, 9 years old, in a navy blue suit he insisted on wearing, stood up, placed both hands on the table, and said, clear as day, "We're leaving. For good." He was looking directly at my mother. There were still bits of birthday cake on everyone's plates. The candles had just been blown out. My sister had her phone in one hand, halfway through filming the moment. My brother was still mid-laugh from a joke someone cracked seconds earlier, and Micah's words just cut through it all, like a gust of cold air in a warm room. And the craziest part? I didn't stop him. If you had told me a year ago that my son would be the one to stand up to the most controlling, manipulative person in our lives, his own grandmother, I would have laughed or cried, probably both, because I didn't think either of us had it in us. I was raised to be quiet, to be polite, to sit through the discomfort with a tight smile and a folded napkin on my lap. That's what my mother taught me. Appearances over emotions, peace at all costs, even if it kills you inside. But Micah didn't get that memo. That morning, he came into my room with his church clothes in hand. His dress shoes were dusty from the last time he wore them, at his dad's custody hearing, actually, and his blazer still had the tag hanging off the inside pocket. He looked up at me, so calm and collected, and asked, "Mom, do you think I can dress up for Grandma's birthday?" I hesitated. "If you want, baby," I said, "but you don't have to impress anyone." He paused. "I know," he said. "I just want to say something." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe he wanted to make a toast or tell Grandma how much he loved her. That's the kind of kid he is, sensitive, soft-spoken, observant. He always notices when I'm sad, even if I don't say a word. He'll bring me tea or draw me a picture when he senses I'm having a bad day. Sometimes I forget how deeply he feels things. But looking back now, I realize he wasn't dressing up to impress. He was dressing up to be taken seriously. When we arrived at the party, just a small get-together at my mother's house, like always, I could feel the tension creeping in the moment we stepped through the door. It was the same as every year. Tightly controlled smiles, overly decorated cake, and cold remarks wrapped in polite sarcasm. Vera, my mother, gave me one glance, looked Micah up and down, and said, "Why'd you dress him up like that? Nobody cares how he looks." Micah didn't say anything. He just sat down quietly, folded his hands, and waited. I should have said something right then. I should have stood up for him, but old habits die hard. I smiled, tight, fake, and said, he wanted to look nice. And that was it. I let it go, like I always do. But Micah didn't. For the next hour, he sat at the table, listening, watching, hearing every dig my mother threw my way about my job, my parenting, my softness, how she would have raised Micah differently, how I was lucky to have family that put up with my mess. She always says things like that, just sharp enough to draw blood, but said with a smile sweet enough that no one calls her out. That's how she's always been, and I always let it slide. I tell myself it's just how she is. That family's complicated. But Micah doesn't have the years of excuses I've built up in my head. He doesn't have the emotional calluses. He just has a sense of right and wrong. And that night, he made his decision. Right after the cake was cut and everyone began talking over each other again, he looked up at me with those quiet eyes and whispered, "Can I say something?" And I nodded. I had no idea what he was about to do, but when he stood up and spoke those words, I dressed up to say this: we're leaving. For good. I knew he was doing something for both of us. He wasn't just protecting himself, he was protecting me. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt safe. Before the party, things were already falling apart. People assume birthdays are joyful. Family gathered around cake and candles, old stories shared over wine, laughter echoing through the house. That's the image you picture when someone says, family celebration. But for me, birthdays, especially my mother's, have always felt like walking into a pressure cooker with no release valve. My name is Alara. I'm 33, a single mom, and I live with my son Micah in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It's not much, but it's ours. A quiet space, warm and safe. Nothing like the house I grew up in. Micah is 9, thoughtful, quiet in public, chatty at home. He's the kind of kid who apologizes when he accidentally steps on a bug and who holds my hand in the grocery store without needing to be told. He's also sharp. He notices everything, more than I ever realized. The week before the party, he asked me if we really had to go. "Can we just send a card?" he said while stirring his cereal. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I wished we could. "You know how Grandma is," I said. "She expects everyone there." What I didn't say was this: I was already dreading it. Every year, the same script plays out. We arrive. She compliments everyone else. She critiques my weight, my clothes, my parenting, makes subtle digs in front of others that are designed to embarrass but impossible to call out. If I say anything, I'm too sensitive. If I stay quiet, I feel small. That's how it's always been with her. Passive aggression dressed up in pearls. Vera, my mother, is the kind of woman who demands perfection in everyone else but allows herself every flaw. Growing up, she kept our house spotless and our smiles camera-ready. But inside those walls, love felt like something you had to earn. If you got an A, she'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If you cleaned your room, she'd run her finger over the baseboards. And when I cried, she'd say, "You think you have it bad? You don't know what bad looks like." I didn't know what emotional abuse was back then. I just thought I was a disappointing daughter. When I got pregnant with Micah at 23, her disappointment reached a new level. My boyfriend at the time, Micah's father, left before he even saw the ultrasound. I remember the day I told her. She just stood there in silence for a moment before sighing and saying, "Well, I guess you've really done it now." She said she would help where she could. But help came with strings. Advice disguised as criticism. Babysitting offered with conditions. Emotional debt disguised as generosity. For years, I let it slide. I told myself Micah needed a grandmother, that I shouldn't burn bridges just because I was hurt. I tolerated her cold comments. I swallowed the shame. I kept the peace. But something had been shifting lately. Not in her, she never changes, but in me. I'd been feeling this slow, aching exhaustion, the kind that sits in your bones. It's what happens when you spend your whole life tiptoeing around someone who can hurt you with a single glance. I started seeing myself through Micah's eyes, and I didn't like what I saw. A mother who kept quiet when someone treated her badly. A woman who smiled through pain just to keep others comfortable. And Micah? He was starting to notice too. There was a moment, a week before the party, when he found me crying quietly in the kitchen. I didn't even realize he was awake. He just walked in, looked up at me, and said, "You don't have to go if you don't want to, Mom." I knelt down and hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. I didn't tell him then, but something shifted in me that night. I started asking myself, why do I keep putting myself in front of someone who never sees me? Why am I teaching my son that this is love? So when the invitation came, just a text, no warmth, no emojis, I knew we'd still go. I wasn't ready to cut the cord. Not yet. But Micah. He was already further along than I was. He was already preparing to say what I couldn't. And soon, I'd realize that this birthday party wouldn't be like the others. Why dress up? Nobody cares how you look. We pulled into my mother's driveway about 10 minutes late. I'd spent the whole ride coaching myself to breathe slowly, to keep my voice calm. I even practiced smiling in the rearview mirror. Old habits, I guess. But my hand still shook a little when I turned off the ignition. Micah looked over at me from the passenger seat, his little suit jacket buttoned up tight. He'd brushed his hair 3 times that morning and tucked his notebook into his backpack like he was preparing for something important. I noticed then that he'd even polished his shoes. I didn't say anything, just squeezed his hand and said, "You ready?" He nodded, but didn't smile. The moment we stepped inside, I felt the weight of Vera's house settle on my shoulders like it always did. Everything looked perfect, like it always did. The hardwood floors gleamed, the china was already set, and soft classical music played in the background. Always Bach, never Mozart, because Vera had opinions about that. "Look who finally decided to show up," she said from the kitchen doorway. Her voice had that fake sweetness she used when guests were around. Her tone always sounded nice to other people, but I knew better. Before I could respond, her eyes landed on Micah. She looked him up and down, his neat blazer, the dress shoes, the tie he spent 10 minutes adjusting in the mirror, and scoffed. Why dress up? Nobody cares how you look, she said, half laughing, like it was just a harmless joke. Micah blinked. His face didn't change, but I felt his hand tighten around mine, and I just stood there. I should have said something. I should have snapped back with, well, I care how he looks. Or even just, don't talk to him like that. But instead, I did what I always do. I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled. He just wanted to dress up, I said, pretending like it didn't sting. Because that's what I've done my whole life around her. Minimize. Diminish. Pretend it didn't hurt. The party moved along in slow motion. My brother Jonah showed up an hour late and got a standing ovation. My sister Lenora brought some overpriced bottle of wine, and Vera made a dramatic fuss about how only Lenora knows her taste. She called Micah Michael twice and didn't bother correcting herself. He didn't say a word about it. I could see it on his face, though. The quiet observation, the way his eyes scanned every interaction. He wasn't distracted by the cake or the presents or the chatter. He was watching, absorbing. And Vera? She was in rare form. At one point, while everyone was gathered in the living room, she leaned over to me and said, "You could at least try to wear something that flatters you. It's a party, not a PTA meeting." It wasn't loud enough for everyone to hear, just enough for me to feel it, to remind me of my place. I looked down at my blouse, the one I wore to work interviews, and instantly felt like a child again. Small, powerless, embarrassed for trying. That's the thing about my mother. Her words aren't always loud, but they land like punches. Death by 1,000 cuts. I went into the kitchen to grab some water and caught my reflection in the microwave door. My cheeks were flushed. My eyes looked tired. I felt like a balloon someone had slowly let the air out of. When I came back into the room, Micah was sitting stiffly at the dining table, his hands folded in front of him. His backpack, he'd insisted on bringing it, was tucked beneath his chair. He wasn't eating, just staring straight ahead at the cake. I sat beside him and whispered, "Are you okay?" He looked at me, serious and calm. "Can I say something later? After the cake?" I hesitated. "Say something about what?" He just said, "You'll see." Something in his voice made me pause. It wasn't angry, it wasn't scared, it was steady. And in that moment, I realized something that sent chills up my spine. Micah wasn't just upset. He was planning something. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a cry for attention. My son was going to say something to the room, something that had been building inside him for a long time. And he was dressed up not to be cute or formal, but to be taken seriously. He looked at me. I nodded. It was right after the cake was brought out. My sister had insisted on filming Vera blowing out the candles, like we were some happy family sitcom. Everyone crowded into the dining room, faking cheer. Vera posed with her slice of cake and made a loud joke about how she was too young to be a grandmother, and everyone laughed harder than they needed to. I was standing beside Micah, who was seated at the edge of the table. His posture hadn't changed. He was still sitting upright, his back straight, hands resting on his lap. That little suit he wore made him look older than 9. Too old, like he had grown years overnight. Vera passed him his slice with a half smile and said, "Don't make a mess this time." It wasn't cruel, not on the surface, but that's how she worked. Her voice always had that slightly amused tone, like everything she said was a joke. She could insult you and pretend you were the one being too sensitive for not laughing. Micah didn't touch his cake. He just turned to me and asked quietly, "Can I say something now?" I looked down at him. His eyes were steady, unblinking. This wasn't nerves. He was ready. I hesitated. My heart picked up. I scanned the room. Vera was laughing with Jonah now, sipping white wine like this was her throne, and we were all her subjects. Lenora was scrolling on her phone, barely pretending to be present. Nobody noticed us. I bent down. "Micah, what are you going to say?" He looked up at me. The truth. Just that. 3 words. So simple, but they held the weight of years, of things I never dared speak in that house, of silence I had swallowed until it made me sick, of bruises no one saw because they didn't show up on skin. I felt a rush of panic then, not because I didn't want him to speak, but because part of me still feared Vera's reaction. That old fear, built from a lifetime of walking on eggshells. The one that told me not to make waves. That kept me quiet even when I wanted to scream. But Micah was looking at me like I had the power to either open the door or shut it in his face. And for the first time in my life, I chose the door. I nodded, that was it. A simple nod. And he stood up. He pushed his chair back with the smallest scrape against the hardwood floor. Everyone turned, confused. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He just reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, straightened his little tie, cleared his throat. I dressed up today, he began, because I wanted to be taken seriously. The room froze. Vera cocked her head, a smile still fixed on her face, but her eyes were already narrowing. Micah continued. His voice was soft, but it carried. I wanted to look nice because I have something important to say. Grandma, you're not nice to my mom. There was a pause. He looked straight at Vera. You make her feel bad. You say mean things and laugh like it's funny, but it's not. It makes her cry when she thinks I don't see. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. I was watching my son do what I had never had the courage to do, stand in that house in front of everyone and call it out. And I don't want to come here anymore, he said, his voice tightening slightly, because it hurts her. And if you can't be kind to my mom, then we don't want to be here. The silence that followed felt like the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Vera opened her mouth, probably to say something dismissive, to wave it off like always. But before she could, Micah looked at me and said, We're leaving, right, Mom? And I finally spoke. Yes, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We are. There was no yelling, no dramatics, no storming out. I just picked up my purse, took Micah's hand in mine, and we walked toward the front door. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a scared little girl in that house. I felt like a mother, a woman, whole. Micah had spoken the truth, and in doing so, he gave me my voice back. We're leaving. For good. You could hear the fork drop. I didn't expect the silence to last that long. Micah's words hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. If you can't be kind to my mom, then we don't want to be here. And then, that final line, so clean and final. We're leaving. For good. For a moment, no one moved. Vera's face didn't change at first. She was still frozen in that half-smile, blinking slowly like she'd been slapped in the face but didn't want to admit it stung. That was always her way. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just sharpened herself. But even she didn't know how to respond to this. My sister paused her recording mid-shot, her phone slowly dropping into her lap. Jonah was chewing a bite of cake he suddenly seemed to regret. And I, after years of thinking I needed permission to walk away, felt something settle inside me. It wasn't rage, it wasn't sadness, it was clarity. I felt Micah's fingers slip into mine as he stepped away from the table. His hand was warm, steady. He didn't look back at them. He just looked up at me. Are we ready? He asked, and I nodded. Again. We didn't rush. There was no dramatic exit. Just two people, a mother and a son, walking out of a house that had never really been a home. But before I reached the door, Vera's voice followed us. Elara, don't do this, she said. There it was, cold, calculated. No apology, no acknowledgement, just controlled, reaching out with her voice like a hand trying to drag me back into place. You're going to regret raising him soft, she added louder now. The world won't care about his feelings. I turned around, slowly, calmly. I'm not raising him to be soft, I said. I'm raising him to be kind, to be brave, to be better than what I grew up with. That wiped the smile off her face, and I knew in that moment she wasn't shocked that he stood up for me. She was shocked that I didn't stop him. She'd spent so many years molding me into someone small and quiet. She never saw it coming, from him or from me. We stepped outside. The cold air hit us immediately, but it felt good. Like breathing for the first time after being underwater too long. I could hear the muffled sounds of the party behind the door, but I didn't care. It wasn't our party anymore. It never really had been. Micah looked up at me once we reached the car. Did I mess everything up? I knelt beside him, heart breaking a little that he even had to ask. You didn't mess anything up. You told the truth. That's brave. That's everything. He nodded slowly, and I could see the weight lifting off his small shoulders. Maybe he didn't understand every layer of what had happened, but he understood enough. He understood that love doesn't feel like walking on eggshells, that respect isn't something you should have to earn from family, that sometimes protecting your peace means walking away from people who won't change. As we drove home, he sat quietly staring out the window, not tense, not anxious, just peaceful, like he'd said what needed to be said. And me? I was still shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, relief, and something else I hadn't felt in years, pride. Not just in Micah, but in myself, because I didn't make excuses this time. I didn't shrink. I didn't explain away her cruelty or pretend it didn't hurt. I let my son speak the truth, and I stood with him in it. That day wasn't just a birthday party. It was the end of a story I'd been trapped in for 33 years. It was the day we stopped playing the roles Vera had written for us. Micah wasn't just a boy in a suit. He was a mirror, showing me who I really was and who I could be if I finally chose to stop apologizing for needing love that doesn't hurt. And when we walked through the front door of our little apartment that evening, he kicked off his shoes, tossed his blazer on the couch, and said, "I'm starving. Do we have mac and cheese?" I laughed, a real, honest laugh. We made dinner, just the two of us. No candles, no camera-ready smiles, just warmth, safety, freedom. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like something was missing. We had everything we needed. We had each other. We didn't just leave the party. We left the cycle. That night, after the dishes were done and Micah was in bed, I sat alone in our small living room, wrapped in a blanket, the TV playing softly in the background. I wasn't really watching. I was just sitting there, thinking about what had happened, what we had done. It wasn't just a dramatic moment. It wasn't just a boy in a suit making a statement. We had walked away from something much bigger than a birthday party. We had walked away from a pattern that had shaped generations of silence and shame. I thought I'd feel guilty. That's what always held me back before. Guilt. The kind that's been fed to you since childhood, disguised as family loyalty. But I didn't feel guilt. I felt peace. Like I had stepped off a treadmill I didn't realize I was on. For the first time, there was stillness in my chest instead of dread. I thought about all the years I had let myself be reduced in that house. I thought about the times I cried in bathrooms or stared into mirrors trying to fix something about myself that wasn't broken. I thought about the lies I had believed, that I wasn't enough, that my voice didn't matter, that love was something I had to earn. And I thought about Micah, about the way he looked when he stood up. Steady, calm, brave. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He was clear. He had seen me, really seen me, at my lowest. And instead of becoming quiet like I had learned to be, he had become courageous. That moment, that speech, wasn't just about Grandma. It was about me. It was his way of saying, "You matter. You deserve better. And I won't stay silent about it." I realized something else, too, that even though I had been the parent, he had protected me in a way I hadn't learned to protect myself. That kind of wisdom in a child, that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from watching, from caring deeply, from growing up in a home where the truth is spoken, even if it trembles when it comes out. He didn't just speak for me that day, he showed me who he was becoming and who I could still become. The next morning, I sent a short message in the family group chat. "Micah and I won't be attending future gatherings. Please respect our decision. This isn't up for discussion." Vera didn't reply. Lenora sent a thumbs-up emoji. Jonah sent a single text. Understood. That was it. And strangely, it was enough. I started therapy 2 weeks later. For the first time, I didn't walk in, feeling like I needed to explain why I was there. I just said it. I don't want to repeat what I grew up with. That became my goal. Not revenge, not reconciliation, just healing, growth, peace. Micah and I made new traditions. On what would have been Thanksgiving at Vera's, we went to the lake and fed ducks. For Christmas, we stayed home in pajamas and watched every version of The Grinch. And on Mother's Day, he brought me breakfast in bed, cereal and toast cut into the shape of a heart. "I like our family now," he said. "It's quiet." I nodded. "Me too? I won't pretend it's been easy. Some nights I still question myself. I wonder if I overreacted, if I should have just kept the peace. But then I think about Micah's eyes the day of that party, how clear and certain they were, and I remind myself, peace isn't the absence of conflict, peace is the presence of safety. And we finally have that. We didn't just leave a party. We left the narrative that told us love means tolerating harm. We stepped away from guilt passed down like a family recipe. We made room for something new, a family built not on fear, but on trust, on listening, on protection that flows both ways. Micah taught me something I should have known all along, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't confronting a person, it's leaving them. And sometimes the person who saves you isn't someone older or stronger, but someone smaller, standing in a suit 2 sizes too big, telling the truth when it matters most. We closed the door behind us, and this time, we didn't look back. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to walk away from someone who was supposed to love you but didn't know how, then I hope you know this. You are not weak for setting boundaries. You are not broken for wanting better. And you are not alone. Sometimes, the hardest thing in the world is breaking a cycle you were raised in. But you can. You absolutely can. And when you do, you give the people who come after you, your children, your nieces and nephews, even just the people watching you, permission to do the same. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and let me know in the comments if you've ever had to make a hard decision like this. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories, ones that don't shy away from the messy parts of life, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And above all, take care of yourself. You deserve that much.